Welcome to What Healthy Couples Know That You Don't, a podcast dedicated to helping you create the relationship you truly want.
Welcome to Keeping It Real with Rhoda. Two relationship therapists sharing wisdom about relationships. Today's source of wisdom is Dr. Wyatt Fisher, and he was with me in my previous episode, number 108, which I enjoyed so much that I brought him back today. He is a licensed psychologist, has been in private practice in Boulder, Colorado, specializing in marriage counseling since 2004. He is the author of the Total Marriage Refresh marriage book and a fellow podcaster on the Dr. Wyatt Show marriage podcast, and created the Keep the Glow couples app. He's been married since 1999. Thanks for being here.
Yeah, sure thing, Rhoda. Thanks for having me.
So let's begin with, what do you love about couples work?
I love the breakthroughs. When couples come in, they're stuck, they're hopeless, they don't see a path. And so when I have both partners who are teachable and willing to work with the process of healing, to see them actually make breakthroughs and to see them finally feel hope and to see them finally find a path that's going to work for their relationship, I think that's one of the most rewarding things for me about working with couples.
Absolutely. And yeah, I like that a lot. Where do you begin when helping couples and why?
Resentments. When there's active resentments, as you know, nothing else goes well. Like I was just mentioning on your podcast, or the reverse when we did our podcast review or interview, resentments are part and parcel to long-term relationships because you have two imperfect people rubbing shoulders day in and day out. So inevitably feelings are going to get hurt, needs are not going to be met. And when those things happen, we're not trained on how to handle that well, so we handle it poorly. And we either stuff it or we get passive aggressive, we wall off, and now we have resentments. And when you have active resentments, nothing else goes well. It's hard to feel emotionally close with someone you resent, hard to have intimacy with someone you resent. So for me, the first order of business is always resentments. And so I help couples consolidate their categories of resentment. And then I teach them one of my tools called the Reunite tool, which basically keeps the conversation safe and constructive. And then we systematically work through one resentment at a time until we've cleared them.
Tell the definition of love in the water that you had.
Yeah, one analogy of love and resentments I think about is if you're standing in front of a river and the water flowing in front of you represents love, if you want that water to flow stronger, you want the current to be stronger, you have to hike upstream and remove the debris. And that debris upstream is the resentments. And sometimes that debris might be 100 feet upstream, sometimes it might be a mile or two upstream. But if you want the love to get stronger in your relationship, you have to remove the resentments, and that's one way to think about it.
I think that's great. What's one of the biggest mistakes couples make, and what's the solution?
One mistake, similar to our previous conversation, is thinking that everything is their partner's fault. Because when you have that mindset, you're not thinking about yourself, how you can get better, how you can improve, how you're making the dynamics worse. You get hyper-focused on everything your partner is doing wrong. Now, granted, they might be doing a lot wrong, but we often underestimate how are we contributing to the problems? How are we making those vicious cycles worse? How are we reacting to their problematic behaviors in ways that are making the dynamic worse? And so if couples and partners can start slowly looking at, what am I doing that's making this worse? Yeah, my partner may have some glaring issues, but how am I reacting to those issues? And helping people break this logic that it's your fault why I just did what I did. It's your fault why I said what I said. If you wouldn't have said X, Y, Z, I wouldn't have had to have responded the way I did. That logic right there means you're never responsible for you. And so I really try to help partners realize you're responsible for what you say, what you do, regardless of what your partner says or does. Obviously, your partner's behavior is going to create impulses in you to want to react in a certain way, but at the end of the day, it's a choice. And if you can view it as a choice, now you can start taking ownership for your side of the street, and that's what you can work on, and that's the only thing you can control.
Any tips for reducing reaction?
One is I use this concept called flooded, and John Gottman talks about flooded a lot as well, so that when things start heating up, try to catch it, first of all, in the pre-flooded stage when you're just noticing the symptoms, right? You're noticing your heart racing, you're noticing a knot in your stomach, or your brain's getting tingly, your palms are getting sweaty. Try to catch it early and call the word flooded. And that means we're going to stop talking. We're going to take a break for 20 minutes up to 24 hours to get out of fight, flight, or freeze. And then we come back together and process through what we both were feeling. And so many couples, as I'm sure you know, have the bad habit of we continue to engage even when we're flooded. And then the worst of them comes out, and then they do a lot of damage. And the more you have those kind of interactions, the harder it is to rebound because it creates emotional scar tissue.
Absolutely. Yeah, I agree. What's the biggest source of communication problems and what's the answer?
Yeah, so I would say it is resentments is the biggest source. And the analogy I use is when you're with a friend, think of it as water. It's another water analogy. If you're with a friend, you have purified water because your communication with a friend, on average, there's no unmet needs in that friendship. There's no hurt feelings in that friendship. It's just we're hanging out. You're my friend, right? You're my buddy. You're my pal. Like we got each other's back. There's no there's no hard feelings between us because we're friends. We have purified water, we have clean water in our communication. Now, when you contrast that with a long term partner, now we have mud. And mud is the hurt feelings, mud is the unmet needs, mud is the resentments. So now in our communication and marriage, we're merging mud with clean water, and now we have muddy water in our communication. And so now we have some digs coming out in our communication. We have some sarcasm coming out. We have some just subtle, negative innuendos in our back and forth, some contemptuous comments. And now I feel like we can't communicate because when we try to communicate, it escalates or you mishear me. And so I think a lot of it comes back to these underlying unresolved resentments and issues in the relationship. And so we're dealing with muddy water, and that's why we have communication problems. One of the top reasons. So the goal is we got to remove that mud from the water. And you do that by addressing those resentments, resolving those underlying issues so that when we do communicate, the water's more clean, it's more pure. So by default, we have less communication problems.
Mm, that's great. A current issue that many people are struggling with is politics. So, what can people do to make things more bearable if there are real differences between a husband and a wife or two partners?
Yeah. Yeah, I think first step is just respecting differences politically as an area of diversity. Differences can come up in all sorts of areas, obviously, when you have a long term relationship, but view it as an area of diversity. Like, oh, I land on this side of politics, my partner lands on that side. And so, if you view it as an area of diversity, then you need to try to think more respectfully of, well, I'm going to respect how they're landing, I want them to respect how I'm landing. And then when it comes to venting, you have to make sure you're not slandering everyone who votes for the way your partner votes, for example, because then you're indirectly putting down your partner. And so it's a balance of I need to be true to my feelings and vent how I'm feeling with the political scene and be true to what's going on for me, but doing it in a way that doesn't clump my partner and how they voted with all the people who are representing the political party I'm in disagreement with. And if I'm on the receiving end, when my partner is venting about politics, if I have a different view, not to turn that into a debate. This is not time for me to correct you and fact check you and tell you how you're seeing it wrong. Instead, I'm going to view this as just part of your daily experience in your journey in your life. And so I'm just going to respond with empathy and try to put myself in your shoes with how you're seeing the world based on how you're wired. And so when you vent about how you're feeling with politics, I'm not going to steer you in a different direction or try to show you the light by trying to convince you you're looking at it wrong because now you're not going to feel supported if I do that. But instead, I'm just going to be here for you and be supportive and empathetic, and it can just be part of what we're both sharing day to day. So I think it's a combination of respecting the diversity and then responding with compassion and empathy instead of correction.
Mm, or criticism.
Yes. Yes.
We all love criticalness.
Yes. That's right.
Okay. Do you agree both people have to look at themselves and their part in the problem? It's never just one person's fault.
Yes, it's extremely rare. There might be, rare instances where, someone has an active addiction. And
Mm,
like that is an issue where, okay, that's your issue. You got to work on that addiction. You got to get some extra help for that addiction. Or maybe an affair, right? Your partner's having an active affair. Like, okay, you're choosing to have that affair. You got to cut that out if we have any chance of repairing. So there are some where it's okay, that's my partner. However, by and large, it's both partners, right? It's both partners contributing to the dynamics. And as we've discussed, it's all about finding your side. Like, what am I doing that's making this worse? How am I contributing? How am I contributing to these vicious cycles? And that's where, similarly, I always encourage couples to look for, I call it the 50% rule. And the 50% rule is okay, when my partner brings up a complaint, my job as a ethical partner is I got to figure out what's my piece in that complaint because your partner is your biggest asset for personal development. But we don't like how they deliver the feedback, so we get defensive. But if
mm.
we can reframe marriage as the ultimate refinement tool, where our partner is our biggest asset to highlight our blind spots, to highlight our growth areas. We need to work on their delivery, right? Because we don't want to feel attacked or criticized, and there's tools for that. But if we can think about it that way, now when my partner gives me constructive feedback, now the expectation is not I have to swallow everything because they may not be correct. Some of this might be circumstantial, some of this might be my partner projecting onto me. But what I can probably bank on is there is probably a kernel of truth in that feedback that I need to reflect on, right? And that kernel of truth, think about a kernel of popcorn. It could be teeny, right? And this is the 50% rule. So the feedback, there could be a teeny kernel of truth, maybe that's 5%. Or it might be a huge kernel of truth and it's 95%. But me as the listener, I'm in control of discerning what that kernel of truth is. And because I'm in control of that, it sidesteps the need for me to defend. And it allows me to really mull over what the kernel of truth is. And it brings out my internal motivation to own something and to make an adjustment. And that's the name of the game. Because if you want to instill hope, the number one way to instill hope is you want to feel like I can give my partner feedback, they don't get defensive, and they make an adjustment. And if you start doing that for your partner, you're asking for feedback, you don't get defensive, you discern the kernel of truth, and then you make an adjustment, that's going to instill hope. If you want your partner to feel hopeless, get defensive with all feedback and make no changes. That's the guaranteed way to make your partner feel hopeless.
How do you encourage people to take that step of looking at themselves, at that kernel of truth? What can
Mhm.
my audience do to step towards it instead of away?
Yeah. I think the first step is recognizing you are not responsible for owning all the feedback you just received. And I encourage to think about feedback in three buckets. And this three buckets metaphor helps couples, helps partners figure out the kernel of truth because it just kind of breaks it down. So one bucket you can put your partner's feedback into is the fluke bucket. And that means what they just said I could get better at, that's a fluke. I've never heard that before. That was all circumstances. I don't think that was anything to do with me. I'm putting that in the fluke bucket. Now, you don't say this out loud. Fluke
Right.
bucket, right? You don't do that because that, that wouldn't go well. Uh, and ethically, you can't put the same feedback in that fluke bucket either. So if you've heard feedback more than once, that's the same feedback.
Mm.
Ethically, you cannot be putting it into the fluke bucket. But there's going to be times where your partner thinks you can improve on something and it was a fluke, and you put that in the fluke bucket. The second bucket you can put it into is all me. And that means what they just said I could do better. I know that's a growth area for me and I'm really bad at that. No excuses. I have to really buckle down on that topic, that behavior. The third bucket, which is the most common, is partially me. And that bucket says, okay, what they just said I could improve in, some of that was circumstantial, not my fault. Some of that I think is my partner just projecting onto me, or they have a sensitivity. That's not my fault either. But there was a piece there that I think I probably could have done better. And that's the part I'm going to focus on. So those three buckets, fluke, all me, partially me, that helps. And so if you get feedback, I do a tool called the bullseye that facilitates this. And so the goal of it is you get feedback and you just say thank you for the feedback. Then over the next day, you're mulling it over while you're walking your dog. You're mulling it over while you're at the gym. While you're cleaning the house. You're just thinking about the feedback while you're commuting. And you're thinking about what bucket am I going to put that into? What's the kernel of truth? And I find that when you have, first of all, if it's delivered through the bullseye, that helps. And second, if you have 24 hours to mull it over on your own, that lowers defense walls. And then again, having these three buckets really helps because then again, you're not responsible for all of it. You just have to find the kernel of truth.
And it gives you time to digest and contemplate.
That's right.
Which, digesting in self awareness with thinking about your dark side and what you've done that's contributed to the problem can be really hard.
Yes.
So I really like that time to kind of chew it over.
That's right.
Yeah.
Because then right in front of your partner, you will feel those internal walls come up. But over the
Absolutely.
next day, right, when you're by yourself, then you're more likely to digest, process, walls are down, so you're more likely to find something.
So we all know that novelty is great for the brain. And what are your suggestions for couples to kind of freshen their lives up to be a little more interesting?
Yeah. I would say a couple different things, three different things. One would be I always encourage a weekly date. And one way to freshen things up is I encourage partners to take turns who's planning it. And when you're planning it, try to change it up. And when you plan it, try to think of what your partner would enjoy most, not what you want to do most. So then it's like you're serving your spouse. And so that's a way to change it up. Try things, new activities, new restaurants on your date, your weekly date. A second way to change things up is through changing up your sexual positions or your sexual approach. And so I always recommend every third time you have intimacy, try to do something different. And maybe it's something small like a different position, or maybe it's a different room in the house or a different outfit. Just something that changes it up so it's not like vanilla ice cream and boring, right? Because it gets too routine. A third thing is I always encourage couples to try to have 2 vacations a year. One is just a weekend away, one is a full week away. And during those times, to just have adventures, right? Explore new parts of the world, go somewhere different you haven't been to before, because that really helps liven things up. Where you're in a new city, you've never been here before. What should we do today? And so that's a third way I think that can really help add in some variety and some novelty.
Yes, I like that. Tell me two things anybody in the audience could do today to make their relationship better.
One thing I would say is don't waste your energy on trying to improve your relationship in any other category if you have active resentments, because it's a waste of time. Because a lot of people try to start in different spots, like, oh, we need to improve our communication, or oh, we're not having sex enough, we need to work on that, or whatever. And so while all those things are valid, right, obviously, and have merit, they're not going to stick. It's not going to be effective as long as there's active resentments under the surface. And so if you want your relationship to get better, the very first thing you have to address and resolve are your active resentments. The second thing I would recommend is what we've been talking about, which is even in those resentments you have toward your partner, but especially when you hear their resentments, is looking for your part and have a growing list of here's the areas I can improve in as a partner. Everyone needs that list. I call it a partner cheat sheet, where you have this list of bullets of, okay, I need to be mindful of this, and I need to be working on that, and I need to make sure I'm responding this way. And look at that list every day, even for a few seconds, while you're sipping your tea in the morning, sipping your coffee, be reviewing your partner cheat sheet. Because what that will do is it will bring it back to your mind in a very simple way. Oh yeah, those are the things I said I would work on. Oh yeah, those are my areas that I need to improve. And just by doing that, it's going to raise your awareness and you're going to start catching yourself, how you behave in your relationship. And slowly you'll start adjusting your behavior. You'll start doing those things on your list. And over time, weeks and months of you reviewing that list, you're going to slowly be evolving into a better version of yourself. And that's the name of the game, because that's, again, all you can control, and that'll create hope in your relationship.
How can people have more courage to look at themselves and to be more truthful with their partners about their resentments.
Yeah, being truthful about resentments. Usually, what I do with that is I give couples a list of here's 10 common categories of resentments, and then I give them some silence, some moments of silence, so they can look through that list and figure out where do I have some resentments. And so it makes it a little easier, a little more palatable because they have this list I'm giving them, and then they can add to that list, obviously, because it's not exhaustive. But I find that really helps bring people forward and identify, like, oh yeah, I have resentment in this category and resentment in that category. And they're both doing it. And so that also, I think, makes it safer because it's not just one person bringing up the resentments. They're both going to identify their categories of resentment. So that's the first step. And then when I use the reunite tool with them and train them on this 50% rule of looking for your part, it doesn't have to be everything, it could be 5%. That process, the 50% rule, I think also creates courage because it's much safer to own 5% of something instead of feeling like I have to own 100%. That doesn't feel safe, and I disagree with it, so I'm going to push back and get defensive. So I find that 50% rule frees people up to figure out what they can own. And then if I'm working with them, which usually I am, I can also help them figure out what to own. Because even if they do know it's not all their fault, they can pick and choose what they can own. People still get stuck and they're like, I don't know what I can own on this. And then that's as for me as the helper, I can help them figure that out. Like, well, from what I've heard, it could be this piece, or it could be that mindset, or it could be assuming the worst over here, or it could be this behavior or your tone. Like, it could be so many things. And so helping them identify that also is really essential. And so I think sometimes the therapeutic process can also help that feel safer.
So, one of the things I wanted to ask you, because this just happened for me, was that I interviewed a podcast guest who really got me thinking about the difference between settling and compromise and what trade offs, because there's trade offs with everything, and what's worth it. And when you compromise, it means it's worth it. You know, that giving something up so the other person can get what they want is worth it. And settling is when it may not be worth it for both of you or either of you, and being able to think about that distinction. And it was just something I hadn't thought about before. What is something that you've learned from a podcast guest that's got you thinking in a fresh way? Because that's one of my favorite things.
Yeah. Oh, wow. Let's see. I've done several through the years, so I have to think back on the different interviews I've done. You know what? I remember interviewing one, and his focus was all about how to make the bedroom more fun,
Mm,
and how the bedroom often is kind of intimacy can be kind of anxiety inducing for people and kind of heavy, a heavy topic. And his whole thing was let's lighten it up, right? As long as we've resolved our resentments and we're feeling emotionally connected, let's make the bedroom more playful and more spontaneous and just more enjoyable, and just kind of more lighthearted. And so I thought that was an interesting take and something that isn't necessarily focused on enough.
Emily Nagoski, who I interviewed,
Ah,
she said her new thing is pleasure is the measure.
okay.
And that so being playful really kind of fits in with that is because it's really about what gives you pleasure. And
Yeah.
I don't think we think about pleasure. I think about pleasure. I don't know about you, but I feel like people get so busy with working and taking care of the kids and running to the soccer games, etc., that they don't think about pleasure. And
Hmm.
and I just think pleasure is such an important part of life.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And if you're low libido, it's hard to prioritize pleasure. And depending on how your intimacy is approached, you may not experience much pleasure,
That's
right? So
right.
usually it's a little bit of both. It's okay, during intimacy, how do we maximize pleasure for both partners, not just one? And if I am low libido, how can I reevaluate the importance of intimacy? Because it may not be my top need, it may not be what I'm thinking about, but it is for my partner. And so, how do I buy in to this value of intimacy when I can take it or leave it? right? Because a lot of people land there. And what I encourage, as a minimum, one thing I encourage is don't think about intimacy as a need for your partner. It's not about his needs or her needs, it's about the marital needs. Because when couples have regular sexual contact, it does strengthen their bond emotionally, physically, spiritually. And so to get away from this mindset of, oh, it's just for his needs or it's just for her needs. Because when you think about it that way, you're less motivated, right? You're less willing to probably participate. But if you think about it as it's the marriage needs, now it's a higher level and a little more buy-in for a lot of people.
Yeah, the us. I think sometimes it's, my job as a therapist is there's you and there's you. And my job is to help you learn to take care of the us.
Yes, yes, that's a great way. Yeah, because when you're working with couples, you're not my client, you're not my client, your marriage is my client.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
So tell my audience where they can get more from you, learn more
Sure.
about you.
Yeah, probably the easiest way is my podcast, the Dr. Wyatt Show podcast. You're welcome to check that out. Normally, I publish an episode every week. They tend to be short, about 15 minutes, very practical. You also can check out my website, which is drwyattfisher.com. I have a lot of resources there, free resources, and I'm on social media, all the major ones, and it's at Dr. Wyatt Fisher.
Okay. Thank you so much for being with me today.
My pleasure. Thanks, Rhoda.
Remember, resentment is unspoken pain. Start the conversation before it becomes the silence that ends everything. You can find me on Instagram and all social media at Rhoda on Couples.
Thank you for listening to What Healthy Couples Know That You Don't. If you have enjoyed the show, please leave a rating and review on iTunes and help get the word out. To learn more or connect with Rhoda, visit therapyideas.net.